recording. I'm gonna start recording, yeah, and then I'll just take bits and pieces if that's okay.
Yeah.
So I think I sent you a text late, and because I just dragged my feet. I don't know if it's Kairos time or if I literally just dragged my feet. But you've just been popping up, and then you snarfed your coffee, and I thought, oh my gosh,
Yep. Yeah, I wrote down your question actually.
how do we know, do, be, goodness, and see beauty? Allowing the goodness and beauty to provide us resilience or motivation to speak, motivation and to love.
Mhm.
So that was my question. But let us invoke the Holy Spirit if that's okay.
Excellent. Always a good idea.
Like the morning of the night of these amazing green trees and gorgeous blue sky, of flowering white. I don't know what those are. Something. What are those? Do you know? I don't know. I'm supposed to know. We gather here in virtual space, seeking your word, seeking to hear your voice, believing that as the breeze blows through these trees and across space and time down into Asheville, that your spirit blows among us. May all the meditations of our hearts in this time and space and across virtual space be acceptable and pleasing in your sight, O God, our rock and our Redeemer. Welcome, Dr. Elizabeth Graves, to my screen this morning, my metaphorical table for conversation. And I want to say welcome to you.
Thank
Thanks
you.
for being here.
Well, thanks for wanting to be in conversation.
Yeah.
Every time we have a conversation, it's rich.
Cool.
So,
And how well can you hear me? I've been trying to decide if I need to put my earbuds on or not.
Pretty well.
Okay, cool. So I sent you this question.
Mm-hmm.
What intrigued you by this question?
Well, I think, of course, when I read your question and I wrote it down and just made it kind of broke it down into the words that for me most inspired something, right? Got something kind of moving or shifting when I read your question. And beauty and resilience and motivation to speak kind of spoke to me. And so I guess I don't have anything prepared on that.
You're not supposed to.
I'm hoping that, through dialogue, we can kind of come to a place of discovery together. So I'm finding myself, especially in this time, with the layers and layers of things shifting and moving in our hearts and in our bodies and in Western North Carolina and in our nation and politically as well as racially and the pandemic and globally. I'm finding more and more that it's important to question the question and to really understand the question and to be sure for me that the question is that the question I'm spending time with and really trying to dig through is the question that's meant for the moment. And so I just want to make sure I understand your question. Can you tell me a little bit about what made this question for you a rich one?
So I'm beginning a new worship series right now as we speak, and it's called Beguiled by Beauty. Beguiled by Beauty is the title of a book by Dr. Wendy Farley, who teaches spirituality at, I believe, the San Francisco Theological Seminary, and obviously San Francisco, and it's her new book, and it's coming out in October. And I work a lot with Reverend Dr. Marcia McPhee, and she's a worship design consultant with Worship Design Studio. And she knows that us small churches have amazingly, boom, gone to online worship. And how do we make online worship rich and meaningful? And so in that, for this time, she's created these worship series. And she's using Wendy's book. And as I look at Wendy's book and or begin to think about it, I'm like, exactly right, right? And then with the uprest that's happening in the last 10 days, I was like, oh my gosh. So how do we put our roots down? How do we know an essence of who we are that allows us to show up? Specifically for us white-skinned people, as we watch our sacred and holy black-skinned, brown-skinned brothers and sisters literally be demeaned, be oppressed, be marginalized. And as I hear my white skinned people say, well, of course, all lives matter. Well, yeah, they do. And that's not what Black Lives Matter means, right? Black Lives Matter too. And why are we not seeing them? And so in the midst of the amazing deaths and pandemic, how do we continue to wake up and show up? And when I hear this idea of beauty and being beguiled by beauty, there is a resilience in it. And metaphorically, this week Marsha's using the image of a tree, and she's using Ezekiel 31, which is this image of this amazing tree that all things live in. It provides shade, it provides home, it provides oxygen, and yet its roots are growing deep and tapping into something that's allowing it to be this great big thing. And we also know the end of the story, right? And just a few verses later, the tree gets uprooted and topples. And the tree is metaphor as actually Pharaoh of Egypt. And there is this moment where this tree is providing all this. And it's confusing. And yet as we see stories of emergence and our scientists and our other essence people are beginning to awaken us to the amazing pieces of trees and how we are to find our sustenance in them and looking towards them. So every week I've been coming at the reality of, okay, we're living in a pandemic. We're living in supposedly the wealthiest nation of the world. Supposedly we are it the bomb. And we live in this, I think, falsehood of exceptionalism. And it is happening to us. And now here, social unrest is happening and we're in the midst of a revolution. Mm-hmm. So where do we find our resilience? As people of faith, of people understanding that we have a spirit to us. I'm not just this physical dimension. But somehow when I look out my eye sockets and I imagine that I'm some being, and I'm living in gorgeous Western North Carolina, there is a resilience here. But it's not just seeing the beauty, right? But there is a deeper essence of God's love that is beguiling me to open me up to a grace and a mercy that causes my mouth to open and to speak. I didn't want to say all that until I heard you, so I might put that at the end, but that's where it's coming from. And so you, Elizabeth Graves, I was going to say this at some point. Our connection is you are my spiritual director. I don't know if I'm going to put that in or not. I may. And you help open my spirit and help direct and guide and open me to my spirit, right? And so as we do that together in community, I think it matters that we're having these conversations. So how are you understanding resilience? And I love it that you're looking at the question underneath the question. Is that enough to riff on, to have fun with?
Thank you. That was really helpful. Yeah. I think, what I heard in what you said was beauty as majesty and as almost this this voluntary trance that we can accept and open ourselves to that enables us to find our courage and a rootedness to speak and to act with integrity and righteousness comes to mind, in the divine sense, but with rightness. So I think, when I look at the words that you used and why this felt so juicy for me, And I'll start with resilience, actually. My dissertation and my research is in resilience. And
Did not know that.
yeah, yeah.
That must have been why the spirit was like, knock on Elizabeth's door.
Yeah, well, it's not research I talk about much because it's uncomfortable research for people. I looked at what factors increase resilience in a specifically traumatized population, which for my study was college-age men with a history of child sexual abuse. And so what I really wanted to know is, you know, most of the research that's out there in recovery and resilience is rooted in the experience of women and girls, and not in men at the time. It's gotten better since I did my study. And what we found was that it's an entirely different process in some ways, you know, that it's, that what helps women become resilient to that specific trauma is different than what, and the processes involved are different. And it has really made me see the world differently when I get to work with people, in that, you know, we would like for like all of human nature to be, you know, like these things are what make us resilient, and that's just not true. And one of the things we say in research is that between group differences are greater than, within group differences are greater than between group differences, meaning you and I, we look alike, we're the same gender, you know, we're the same socioeconomic status and age range and that kind of thing, and yet we are more different between us. We have greater difference between us than, you know, than sometimes even our, you know, people of other races or cultures or creeds or what have you. And that is a truth across the literature. And so how do we hold spaces for both? You know, those people who've had a trauma have a need for being together and healing together, and also how they will go about that, even though they may look the same, is very, very different. And so we have to, you know, not look at researchers and practitioners. We have to not look at groups of people that we identify as a group and say, oh, this is what will make this better for this group, because it's going to be so different and individual for everybody. I think the reason I asked about resilience was that I think it's maybe not, for me at least, I think it's really not what we're going for right now. There are these different things that we could be shooting for. And there's surviving an individual trauma, or surviving this time, the chaos of this time. So surviving is just a baseline. And then there's, you know, all these levels. And resilience is the next level. And so resilience, as Richardson defines it, is really just, you know, you were going along at this level, and then you hit a rough spot and your functioning went down. And resilience is really just about returning to that same level of functioning. And I hope for our society right now, global and in the US, that this will not be an issue of resilience, that we will not go back to a pre-chaotic functioning level. You know, I would like to see us in the next level up, which is thriving, or what we call post-traumatic growth. And post-traumatic growth is, you know, you're going along at this level, you hit, you know, a real trauma or a chaos event, and then through a process of healing and recovery with your community, you exceed your previous level and go on. And I certainly, that's my hope for this time, that we can leave behind some of the structures that really keep people in systems and institutionalized oppression patterns, and leave this behind. But I do think it will probably have to be it's not going to be a patchwork. We're going to have to throw out whole systems, I think, in order to make this long-term sustainable. And that, to me, is beautiful.
Wow, that just went deep. Are you saying that to throw out a whole system is beautiful, or the entire process of seeing that we need to throw out entire systems so that we all move to an understanding of healing and thriving is beautiful?
That's a good question, Tamara. Let me go back and talk about my definition of beauty. Because again, I think,
Thank you. Yep.
These terms, if we aren't really careful about what we're saying, could be really incendiary.
Absolutely.
I'm noticing myself breaking down, and I'm not wanting to do that around this, because we know white women's tears in this have not been helpful in the past in racial unrest. But I can't watch that awful video of George Floyd without being horrified to my core that somebody's last minutes on earth would be spent that way. And so and I realized that is just a microcosm of the macro that has gone on for centuries in our nation, and not just our nation, but profoundly so in our nation. And so I just want to be clear that I do not see beauty in that. But what I do see beauty in is, gosh, let me go way back, Tamara. I'm going to go back to, when I was 18 and somebody first exposed me to Keats.
Thomas Keats?
John Keats, the poet.
Thank you.
Writer and poet. And I fell in love with Keats and Mary Shelley when I was in college, and just the questions and the turning things upside down with this beautiful language in ways that really challenged people, but also did it in a very beautiful way. Again, that challenge and beauty, shaking up and getting rid of all, some of those constraints, but doing it in such a way that people were invited into a space of beauty. And Keats wrote in a poem called Ode on a Grecian Urn, something, and I'm going to slaughter this, but it goes something like, beauty is truth and truth is beauty. And something like, that's all there is to know on earth and all we need to know. And I'm sure I just slaughtered that, but I go back to that during these times and I say, what is beauty? And if we look at beauty as truth, as something that endures, the things that don't die, the things that we can look at and we can see, this is truth. Nature, gorgeous nature around us, this is truth. It will endure long after we're gone in some form, the earth, Gaia. Then I can look at that and say, this is true. It's true. It's beauty. It's something that can be relied upon. And I think about the divine in that way too. And so when I say I see beauty in this place of unrest, it's not in the brutal ways in which people are being treated and people are dying. Where I see beauty in it is that it's finally true that we're seeing it and we're speaking it and we're owning it and saying I hope we're saying eventually as a culture, as a nation, yes, this is true. There is truth in this. Oppression is true. And it's not just out there and in our institutions. It's not just in our police forces. It's not just in our schools. It is in literally every institution in our culture and in our nation. And that is because it's in me and it's in you and it's in our hearts, and it's our job to clean that out and scrub it out and educate ourselves and try to clean. And that is beautiful because it's true.
For me, what I heard you saying is this idea of a contemplative life, which is a piece of this worship series. Mm. And the contemplative life isn't spending hours in silence, because we don't have hours of silence. Mm-hmm. A contemplative life is being awake and aware of when that beauty is tapping into my heart. Yeah. And the joy and the celebration is that when I am aware to the truth of God's love, of creation's magnificentness, my heart breaks open to this amazing wonder and sacredness. And at the same time, when my heart breaks open, I see the pain of how we have destroyed things that are beautiful. And the destruction in someone's knee on a neck is not beauty. And when my heart is open to the other sacred pieces of that, then my heart literally breaks to the pain of whatever is broken in that person's heart, that he had to put his knee on that man's neck. And that's what I hear you saying is in all of us. And so how do we be awake to the sacred holy of each and every one of us, as well as to the brokenness, such that we can then heal and find some type of reconciliation? Is that what you're saying? Or have I kind of butchered it?
Mm-hmm. No, that's it. Yeah. You know, I go back to Reverend Sharpton's sermon the other day about, you know, all the ways in which white people have had their knees on the necks of African Americans in this country. And so when I see that video, you know, it causes lots of emotion in me, just pain and grief and empathy for that man, for George Floyd, and then rage at the other man, you know, at the officer. And I think, you know, I love what Father Rohr has to say about, you know, this balance of contemplation and action. And our action has to come from a place of contemplation. And so for me, my action can't just come from a place of empathy and horror and grief at what George Floyd endured in the last moments of his life. It has to also come from the rage that I feel at that officer, because I too have had my knee on the necks of African Americans in my life in ways I'm not even aware of. You know, moments that I should have risen with courage to say something that I didn't, or to, yeah, I mean, and this is hard because I'm sure there are things I was not even aware of, moments that I was not in contemplation, where my silence was complicit. Or, and I think that for me is where it can't for me be about empathy with George Floyd. It has to be about the rage at the officer as well. And then that's what moves in me to say, where am I participating in both of those emotions in my life, and in both of those systems? You know, I feel for him out of a place of empathy. I know the feeling of having someone's knee on my neck, you know, as a young person with ageism, or as a woman with, you know, sexism, or, you know, in lots of other, you know, in other categories as well. And so I feel empathy there, but that can't be where it ends for me. It has to be the rage I feel toward him is rage I feel towards me that is yet undiscovered, that, you know, indicates some thread that needs to be ripped out of me and really examined. Am I making sense?
Yeah, noticing demands that we live differently. So
Yeah.
when we notice, when we're awake to, it demands that we live differently. And if not, we're just going to stay in the tomb from a Christian perspective, right?
Right.
So if we're going to actually leave the tomb and live into a life of resurrection, we have to know what we have to die to, what we have to be crucified to, so that we can live into a different iteration of who we are called to be. Yeah. Maybe not called to be, but who we have been created to be, or manifesting in creative consciousness.
Yeah.
And so from, and you know, it sounds so fun and easy. Why would we not want to do that, right? And the challenging part of this text, specifically in Ezekiel, is you have this gorgeous picture of this tree that's a home, that's providing oxygen, that's providing shade, that's providing beauty and greenness. And then a few chapters later, the tree is toppled. So it's confusing, right? And I think to live into this tension, I use the word tension a lot, I think we have to be called into that. And so the beauty of the process and the beauty of understanding that we truly are all one is that there is a complexity to that. And to live down into that complexity somehow means that we have to notice it all,
Mm.
to know that we are worthy and holy. You know, and a piece of what you've helped me to do is to realize and to live into my worthiness and my holiness, which is why, for me, community is so important, is because when we rub against each other, you know, that Proverbs that says, as iron sharpens iron, we sharpen each other. And for me, that's the beauty of, and the beauty and the challenge of living in community is we get to open ourselves to all that we are.
Mm-hmm.
Realizing that in our holiness and worthiness, as much as we can take on, we then give that off. Therefore, if we can't accept love and beauty and grace, somehow that closes us off. I'm not really sure where I'm going right now. I think I just lost my train of where I was going.
You know what comes up for me when you were talking about the tree? Is it okay if I jump in?
Yes.
I think what comes up for me about the tree as you're talking about that passage is, and you've probably read it too. It's called I think it's called The Hidden Life of Trees.
I've heard of it.
And just learning how, you know, no tree in the forest is alone. It does not stand alone, that they all have a communication system underground, and that, you know, the mycelium, if you've read Mycelium Running, the Stamets book is about that level of communication that's going on, that, you know, the forest or the trees around us are alive and they are communicating, and they are, you know, when an invader enters the forest, you know, they send nutrients to one end to feed them, to fight it off. And when there's a sick tree, they do the same. Or when the tree is beyond saving, they withdraw nutrients and they send it to another part of the forest. And, you know, it just seems to me that that in itself is kind of a metaphor for, you were talking about community. And you know, no tree is alone. Any group of trees, they are a community. And so like them, we can look, go, these are maple people, and these are oak people, and these are chestnut people, and these are pine people. And we can, you know, look at that, but we are all sending nutrients to one another and withholding nutrients from one another in the community of our humanity. And what strikes me about that passage is, you know, that tree looked majestic and like it was full of power, but its power really comes from the underground community and the people around, the trees in this case around. And at some point that tree was sick and the forest started withdrawing nutrients from them, and it was just a matter of time before they toppled. And in that way, I see it as very similar to what's going on. And I think that's what you're saying as well, is, you know, we have a sick institutional structure, and the nutrients are, we are finally, I hope, in a process of consent to withdraw our energy and our work, our nutrients in this community from those structures. I hope that's where we are.
Right.
And in that way, that tree will have to topple in order for something truer and more beautiful to rise and to grow. But that will be the work of a whole community.
You delight my soul, Elizabeth Graves.
I'm sorry?
You delight my soul.
Well, it's mutual.
So where do we tap in, right? So another piece of our worship is actually giving the tree a drink of water. And so where do our souls tap in? Where do our roots find nourishment? In a contemplative lifestyle that sees beauty, how do we continue to tap into, to soak up enough of something such that we do continue to want to be awake, or that we continue to open our hearts to both receive and to give?
I think the underlying assumption in your question is, let me check it, is that if people are too overwhelmed by grief and overwhelm and anger and the horror of what's happening, they will not rise to the occasion. Is that kind of underlying your question?
So when the winds blow, I don't know if you can see them blowing around me.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Around me. Mm-hmm.
You can call that the spirit blowing through us. You can call that the storms of life blowing when it's really big. I've actually been into and through a hurricane and watched the trees just move and sway, and they don't topple.
Mm-hmm.
They continue to be there. They continue to
Mm-hmm.
to stand and to do the work that they are called to do.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a root system that has created their foundation such that they do continue to stand tall.
I'm not sure. I know I'm ruining this here, but I'm not sure. I'm not sure I have an answer in that.
That's okay.
I think, just like resilience and post-traumatic growth is going to be different for everybody. That process, I think it's different. The processes by which we find the ability to rise to the challenge and to thrive in the midst of this, to bring our voices to bear in a way that changes our community for the better and supports our neighbors. I think that's going to be different for different people. I think some people will need silence and contemplation to find that place of pain where they need to do the work of grief and looking at the horror and the ugly. And then I think there are other people who will need community, to reach out their hands, even virtually, and say, I need support and education and friends in the midst of this. And there will be others who say, that no, it's going to be just going out into the forest and seeing these things that endure. Like, that's where I will draw my hope for this time. And I think people's processes will be different. And I think all of those answers are divine. I think they're all drawn from the divine.
I think that's fantastic. I mean, you just said there's chestnuts and there's poplars and there's oaks. There's deciduous and there's conifers. So we are diverse, and some of us need to get out there and march and to raise our voices, and some of us need to hold on to a sacred space and hold our silence. And some of us need to be the listening ears that say, I just need to hear your story. And some of us need to be the ones that are telling our story in all of our openness and vulnerability, because I need you to see me. And some of us have to be the eyes that see. I think we're called to all those pieces and parts. And I think for me, the other side of that is we can't just stay comfortable at the same time. And so are we listening and looking into those ways that continue to grow us? And or are we in a season where it's our time to know Sabbath continually? I don't know. But the diversity of all of that to me is community. Those webs that we are weaving, and the colors and the diversity of threads and the thickness of threads it expands and it contracts, and it's all of that, which is the discernment piece of listening for where am I in that web of community that creates our world that I live in, which to me is beautiful.
Yes. And Tamara, I have to say this because maybe it's a soapbox, but I feel like, when I have traveled to other nations and other countries and other lands, what has struck me about people's feedback to me as an American about my culture is that we are, I had somebody once say, you all are light zombies. And I was, tell me, explain to me. And this person went, seek, where's the light? Where's the light? And I felt the mockery of that, but it also felt really true, that what's the upside? Where's the silver lining? That we can become so obsessed with finding the hope and hope's important. I'm not dissing hope. But you know, it's a spiritual bypass. It's not doing the work to just look for the pretty, or look for, you know, quickly look for the hope or the light, or gosh, I'm uncomfortable, you know, let me go seek a community that's going to make me feel better. This is not meant to be a comforting time. And so I guess I just want to say, as I would say to my students, that, you know, if we can't hold space for the dark, we can't hold space for the death being a part of, and the only true thing about life that unites us is death. If we can't hold space for the death of what's happening, and the crime of what's happening, and the anger and the bitterness and the resentment and the rage and all of that, if we just seek the light and call it, you know, this superficial understanding of beauty, you know, go seek, that's pretty, that's a pretty piece of whatever, art or whatever, you know, if we don't do the work of allowing ourselves to be discomfited and uncomfortable, then we just continue to be part of the problem.
Can you see this bee flying around me all of a sudden? It's a spirit.
I'm sorry?
This bee. This bee is buzzing my head. Did you see the bee buzzing my head just then? I was discomforted. I was like, well, no, she's talking about doing the work. I just sit here still while this bee is buzzing my head.
Well done, Tamara. You sat there with the discomfort. You held space for the bee.
You know what was going through my head is about 3 years ago, I learned the term unreasonable hope from Alexa Salvateria, who has done literally for 40 years work of immigration reform and immigration justice in California. She lives not very far from the border, the Mexican border. And so her whole life and career has been around immigration and immigrant justice and working with undocumented, non-documented peoples and finding them a way out of no way. And so her term is unreasonable hope. And for me, that holds exactly what you were talking about. Like, we can't just have hope, but it literally has to be unreasonable in that we hold the lament and we hold the grief.
Yeah.
And we don't just sugarcoat it, right? We don't just say, oh, it's going to be okay tomorrow. But we literally have to allow our heart to break open.
We have to be transformed. Yes.
Feel the pain.
Yes.
And to feel the outrage. And to those tears fall from our eyes when we see one of our sacred brothers literally videotaped in his last 8 minutes and 36 seconds as another one of our people have their knee on his neck. And if we're not outraged, and if we don't feel our hearts break open by that, then we're not.
Then we'll never get to the most important step in that, which is not the grief. It's the looking at the officer who perpetrated that and asking ourselves, where in my life have I kept my knee on someone's neck?
Amen.
That's the work, is looking inside. It's not just keeping it out there in the collective. It's looking inside and saying, where might I have participated in this that I wasn't even aware at the time? And how do I scrub those threads out of me? How do I replace it with something new that looks like anti-racism rather than silent, unknowing, unwitting participation in systematic oppression? Yeah. Yeah.
And for me, that's the beguiling part. When I continue to hear Wendy's Farley term, beguiled by beauty, that's the beguiled party. So we're drawn in by the beauty that then opens our hearts, that then we actually do this work that is so hard.
Yeah.
And we can't not do it.
This is the invitation of this time. And you know, if we, David White, who's one of my favorite poets, talks about, you know, missing the harvest. You know, if you decide that, you know, you can always decide, yeah, I don't think I'm going to harvest this season. You know, I'm going to sit in front of my computer or play games, or I'm going to, you know, immerse myself in. You don't have to do the work of contemplation and action. You're a human being with free will. You can always choose out. But this harvest will never. This harvest will never come again. Mm-hmm. And so you lose something that could have been transformative for us. And so we are called right now, I feel like I am being called to a time of harvest. What is going on in the collective that is a mirror of what's going on in the individual, and how do I pull those threads out of me? And it will hurt. and it will be full of rage at that part of myself and grief that I've perpetrated this on others. And it won't stop at our African American neighbors. It will continue with, you know, ways I've perpetrated in all the ways that I enjoy privilege and I may not even be aware of. I will look at it not just in terms of race, but, you know, ageism and sexism and, you know, all of those things I will discover in myself, and I have to grieve them and do the work of pulling them out. I'll just say this. I know we're running short on time, but you talked about your, is he back?
A little bit, but that's okay. I'm sitting here. I'm discomfited. You're opening me up, so thank you.
Well done. So discipline.
Yeah.
Is Joanna Macy, who's a hero of mine, wrote a book called Active Hope. And she talks about how, you know, we are in the midst of a great death that, you know, globally, we are, you know, beyond a point of no return, and that the, you know, the earth as we know it is in a great dying, and now is the time to wake up, and the human work in that really needs to be done. We need to go out there and do conservation, and we need to preserve what can still be preserved, and we need to understand we are in the dying. And I think that's important here, politically speaking. And by political, I mean like our voting and, you know, our nation's leadership and that kind of thing. And then also globally, that same trend is going on across the globe, this sense of nationalism. And then also this, you know, movement, the Black Lives Matter movement, and kind of what's happening here. We are in a great dying of, I hope, the institutions that perpetrate this kind of, and keep them, those systems that keep them ongoing. And so I think we just need to, for me, I'll speak for me, I need to keep being aware of that, you know, this beauty is in a stage of transformation that includes dying. And yet it will endure in some way that makes it still beautiful and enduring. And the same, I think, is true with the human race. We are in a transformation stage of dying, and there's beauty in that something good, I hope, will not just help us be resilient to that, but that we can emerge from this with growth, you know, from this period of international and national and racial and pandemic trauma. That's my hope.
Amen. Preach. Preach.
This is a time for white people to hold their tongues, you know? So, and observe and amplify the voices of our Black neighbors. So yeah, I'm just aware of that, and I'm not asking for any response from you or, you know, anything like that. I'm just aware that, you know.
And I do, you know, you're talking to a church who's going to watch this is going to be either 92 or 100% white. And so I think it also matters right now that white people are talking to white people. Mm-hmm. And I have to figure out, how have I kept my knee on somebody else, and to take that piece out of me and to do that work. We have work to do. And it is to listen. And it's also to look inside of us as white people and to know we're part of the problem.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Maybe I'm wrong, but that's where I am.
Yeah, that's where I am too. And I just know, you know, from almost 50 years of doing this, that I have blind spots, you know, and I'm sure that other people are better equipped to find those. Yeah, you know, it's like I tell my students, you know, it's really scary to learn in public. Right?
Amen.
Yeah. And you know, like, to put anything out there is really an act of courage and responsibility, which you know better than anyone, right?
Well,
so
I'm not always the most brave. I will confess I'm not the most brave.
Well, it certainly is an exercise in vulnerability that makes us gets us to a place of scheduled courage. Oh, I'm teaching a class tonight. I got to go muster some scheduled courage. I know. Hey, I'm preaching a sermon. I got to go muster some courage on schedule. Yeah.
Yeah. And if we had more time, I'd say, well, so what's the difference between courage and being brave? Because I've been playing with both of those words, right? Because for me, it's almost scheduled bravery. And bravery then comes out of courage.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just what I love about courage is that it's, you know, it's based on core, on the French word core, which is heart, right? So when my husband always says, 4,000 years of Chinese medicine can't all be wrong, you know, I think about, you know, the heart chakra and how when we act from a place of groundedness through our root chakra and our, you know, our sacrum and our, you know, our energy center and then the heart, then, you know, our throat opens up and we can really embody this super courageous, because we're speaking from the heart, which is a rooted expression like your tree.
Yeah.
And so that's what I think of when I think of courage. It's a really, you know, an open energy flowing rootedness, groundedness that then allows the heart to come up out of our, like to birth the heart out loud, to speak, motivation to speak, right?
That was our last worship series, is Matters of the Heart, where we tried to tap into what are those matters of the heart. So then this piece is going to be, so how do we further tap into that heart, find resilience and strength in that heart so that we do thrive. The contemplative piece of seeing the sacred in those moments, so the sacred and holy piece of popping into a contemplative lifestyle that in the midst of chaos, I can actually see, you know, the glory and the beauty in that moment, even though the kid is screaming or the line has 25 people in it and I don't want to stand here for 45 minutes or the rain is pounding down, but can I see beauty and life in those very moments, which is the contemplative piece. And then later in the summer, we're going to do, the series is going to be called Courageous Faith. So how do we rise that then goes into resistance? That's where we're at. That's our journey.
Beautiful, Tamara. You have such vision. Makes me want to be a part of your congregation.
You can. You just plug in 11 o'clock on Facebook, and there's going to be a video. Thank you. You should get
I love you, lady.
I have to let you go. Thank you. Peace be with you.
Thank you, and you too. Take good care.
Saturday. Bye.
You too. Bye-bye.